assignment fee because of the way the numbers worked out. So while I was in my room right now on break for lunch, I got a call back from a seller. I went on an appointment, not yesterday but the day before, with one of my coaching partners, and we had made an offer of $21,500 on it. And this was a little house in Portsmouth that would be kept as a slow flip for somebody. And the guy called me back and he says, well, if you can do $23,000, you know, we're ready to do it. And he wants to keep his fridge, like the fridge matters. But so he agreed to do 23, and I called them back and I told him that he's willing to do it. Those numbers were strictly based on slow flip numbers. We didn't have to do, there's no retail sales there, so we didn't really even do the 65% minus repairs. So it depends on what your exit strategy is. If you're a rehabber, you can use higher numbers. Not that you want to, you still want to make as much as possible, but you have the ability to. As a wholesaler, though, we have to keep them lower. So how much do I sell for? We have to make sure it stays profitable for the rehabber. There's no, if your rehabber doesn't make any money on it, first of all, it's going to be hard to sell, but secondly, they're never going to buy another house from you. So my personal thing is I always try and leave $30,000 in profit for the rehabber, which means after factoring everything, their selling cost, their closing cost, their hard money cost, everything, their rehab cost, still have $30,000 in profit for the rehabber. If there's no money left for the rehabber, then why would the rehabber buy it? And if they did, if you tricked somebody or snuck a deal into somebody, they're never going to buy another property from you. And this business is real easy. If you're good with your people, you don't need 100 investors. I have like over 2,500 people on my list. I probably sell to 20 to 25 people. That's it, because I sell to the same people over and over again, and constantly I'll get people calling me. I had one when I was in the room, a guy who said, you referred to me, I'm looking for properties. He lives in Texas, he's looking for properties here. I have people constantly saying, oh, send me your houses, send me your deals, and I almost never do, because I have the same people who I know how much they'll spend. It's real easy for me to deal with. I know they come through and they close, so I sell to the same people over and over again. I still keep accumulating new people, because you never know when somebody's either going to go out of business, retire, or have their own deals, or get full. Everybody has X amount of deals they're willing to do at one time, so they may get full and say, well, I'm good right now. So you still have more buyers, but you don't necessarily need them. So if you're wholesaling, how do you get your buyers inside? This is kind of critical. If you go on an appointment, you're not telling them, oh, I'm looking to sell this for you. You're going in as a buyer, so how do you get the buyers inside? One of the last things we do after we get an approved contract, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow during the special sauce, but one of the last things we say after it's signed and we're moving on is that we're going to need to get in at least 2 more times to bring in my lenders and or my contractors to get estimates before closing. The reason I tell them both, contractors and lenders, is because some couldn't pass off as the other. I have one lady I sell houses to, and she's a 90-year-old lady. There's no way I can pass her off as a contractor. So she's a lender when I bring it. Depends on who you're there. And then you may have another guy, there's no way you're passing him as a lender. So I always tell them I might have to bring my lender in or a contractor to come in with an estimate. And then all I do is I'll call, so I let them know that when I do the contract, and then I'll call them. I say, I just want to make sure 2 o'clock on Wednesday is going to be good for you. I want to bring my lender by. It'll be real quick. We'll be in and out in 15 minutes. And basically you're bringing your buyer by. They're going to walk through, a couple minutes, they're in and out. And the whole time I sit and talk with the seller. Piece of cake. So I want to go over the difference between an assignment and a double close. What an assignment is when you contracted the property and you are assigning your rights in that contract to another person. Does that make sense? You're assigning your rights for a fee, the assignment fee, but you are assigning your rights to another person. So I just did a deal, and I'm going to segue for a second on the assignment fee. Actually, I'll wait for the bottom because that's what it was, the seller side only. So on an assignment, there's no fees, there's no cost for you at all. If you marked it up $10,000, you're getting a straight check for $10,000. You have no closing costs, you have no fees, you have no lawyer involvement, you're not spending a dollar, your fee is exactly, you're getting the $10,000 you marked it up. On a double close, it's an A to B and then B to C, so there's 2 closings. You're buying it and then you're selling it at the same table. You can literally turn around here and buy it and then turn back around and sell it. You can do that still with no money, but I want to explain to you the difference and why you would use one or the other. 99% of the time you will always use an assignment. An assignment is way, way, way better because you have no cost. You have no fees. Nothing's getting registered on the deed. Your name's not anywhere. It's not filling out tax forms. You're not involved in the transaction, and there's no fees coming out of it. It's straight money. However, sometimes if you were to buy a MLS property, for instance, or you're buying a HUD house, or sometimes even on the auction sites, they won't allow you to assign it for no reason. They're getting everything they agreed to get, but for some reason it'll say no, no assignments. In that case, you would double close, which would mean you still did your contract, but now you do a brand new contract with you as the seller to your buyer. Both contracts go to the attorney's office. Your end buyer's money is used to fund your purchase, so you can still do it with no money. The problem is, if it was a $10,000 assignment fee, you may end up with $8,200, because now there's recording costs and filing fees and the deed prep and all that. There's closing costs involved as a buyer and as a seller. So we prefer never to do double closings unless we have to. So 2006, 2005, I think it was 5 or 6, I can't even recall. 1 year alone, I spent almost $100,000 on closing costs doing double closings. $100,000 just in closing costs doing double closings because I did not know one little thing, which is the next thing I'm going to teach you, and that's why I'm letting you know just how important this thing has changed everything. So back then, I used to double close whenever there was a big assignment fee. If I'm making $10,000, it didn't matter, but if I was making $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, I was always afraid. I'm like, well, if they see how much I'm making, they're not going to sign. If that guy's owned the house for 30 years and he's leaving with 50 grand, I did a contract on it and I'm leaving with 50 grand, he's going to see that and he's going to freak out and he's not going to sign. Does that make sense? So I would say, let me spend the extra money, let me spend this 2 grand, double close, he never sees anything, they never see anything, everybody's happy. And I did, and that's how I did all my deals back then. When they were over 10 grand, I double closed it and just sucked it up and spent the money. Until an attorney taught me, and you would think, that's why nobody tells you this, is because where does that money come from? The attorneys. That money that you're spending, it goes to them. So they don't want you to know this. So I had an attorney who was trying to get my business, and he taught me about a seller side only HUD. And I said, what's a seller side only HUD? I never heard of this. He's like, oh, no problem. We'll just do one separate HUD for the seller's information and one separate HUD for the buyer's information. And I was like, well, why didn't anyone tell me about this years ago? And so what a seller side only HUD is, I'm assigning the property to you for a $50,000 assignment fee. The buyer sees it because the buyer is, it's involved with that part of the transaction. So the buyer will see it. I don't care what the buyer sees. The buyer is getting everything he agreed to get. Seller's getting everything he agreed to get. But the seller only sees what affects him. He sees the purchase price that he agreed to sell it for. He sees any fees he may have to pay, and he sees the net amount that goes to him. That's it. So the seller doesn't see anything that doesn't pertain to him. Only the buyer sees it. The buyer sees what pertains to him, which would be the assignment fee. So since I learned that, we almost never double close anymore, ever. Ever double close. So I had the closing it was just this past week, where for whatever reason, I didn't control the other attorney. The seller's attorney had their own attorney and wouldn't allow me to do a seller side only HUD. For whatever reason. Some attorneys are like, oh, you can't do that, it's illegal. I'm like, it's not illegal, it's actually, there's a button right on the form, on the settlement statements that says seller side. I have to explain it to them sometimes if I'm not with my own attorney. This particular attorney refused to allow a seller side only HUD. So I debated, do I do a double close? It was only a $13,000 assignment, but still I'm like, if they see it, if these people see it, they're probably gonna, freak out and not want to do it. And so all I did, and I've done this several times before, is I just changed the name of it. I called it a rehab consultation fee. And so it's the same exact thing, but this way it showed up on the HUD for them to see, and it said rehab consultation fee, so it didn't say assignment fee. Same exact thing, just different wording, but just to help them be okay with it. And there's no reason they shouldn't be okay with it. You're not scamming anybody, you're not doing anything at all wrong, you're giving them everything that you agreed to give them. But even though you're giving them everything you agreed to give them, sometimes when people see that you make money, all of a sudden it's bad. Does that make sense? It makes no sense, but that's just human nature. If they agreed to 100 grand, they're happy with the 100 grand, thank you so much for helping me, 100 grand's fantastic, everybody's happy, and then they see you're making 30 grand and all of a sudden they're not happy anymore. Why should that have anything to do with their happiness? It shouldn't, but that's human nature, that's the way it is. So we always try and do assignments, and we try and do seller side only HUDs all the time, so that nobody sees anything. And my attorneys know when I'm controlling it, every single closing is seller side only HUD. Every single time. I don't even want to have to tell you. There's no reason the seller should ever have to see what I'm assigning it for. Everybody got that? So here's a big tip for you, and this is going to come up multiple times throughout the 3 days. Don't ever count the money in someone else's pocket. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by this. If you're a buyer, for instance, you're a rehabber, and you're buying this property, and you just completely evaluated it, and you're happy with it, and you know you can renovate it and make $30,000, right? You're happy. Then you get the assignment. I send over the assignment, and you're like, son of a bitch, he's making 50 grand on this. Don't worry about what I make. You worry about what you're making. Does that make sense? Don't worry about what other people are making. You worry about what you make. And the same thing goes vice versa. Sometimes I'll have somebody selling me a house, and I'm happy with the deal. The assignment comes over, and I'm like, man, he got this house for 10 grand. Like, I might be buying it as a rental. I'm buying it for 30, and I don't know what he's making on it, but you assume he might be making 3, 4, 10 grand. You don't know. Then you find out he got the house for 10 grand. He's making a $20,000 assignment fee on me. But it doesn't aggravate me. I'm like, man, where did he get that from? I'm excited for it, and I'm like, I got to do whatever he did. That was a great, he got a great deal on that, 10 grand. And you don't worry about what other people spite themselves and screw themselves up so bad because they don't want to see someone else make money. They feel like if they're the ones paying that money, that they were taken advantage of or it wasn't a good deal. You should strictly evaluate things based on your numbers and what you're going to make. Don't worry about what someone else makes. We're going to have this come up again when we talk about hard money on Sunday. But I'm going to mention it now since it's up, is we have the same thing happen with hard money. A lot of times people will renovate a house, they do all the work, they spend 4 or 5 months renovating the house, deal with all the headaches and problems, they turn around and sell it and they end up making a $20,000 profit, right? But when they look at their HUD, their payoff, the lender also made $20,000 and he didn't do anything but write a check and then pick up his check. And so they get mad. They get mad and they're like, man, he's making the same amount I did and he didn't do anything. And I'm like, but if you don't use the lender, guess how much you make? 0. So don't worry about what someone else makes, you worry about what you make. On every single deal, don't worry about what other people make. I always bring it back to 0 and I say, so what if I got the house for free? I can't sell it for what it's worth? And that's how I always, when people start getting mad, oh, you're making so much, I say, what I make is irrelevant. That's just a matter of how good I negotiated it. I might make 10 grand, I might make 50 grand. It's all depending on how well we negotiated it. What if I got the house for free? It's still worth what it's worth, regardless of what I paid for it. Its value is the same. So one little tip, and this little tip will save or make you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars more over the course of your career, is to eliminate the word asking. I see it every day and I can't stand it when somebody will send out a property and they say, well, we're asking $85,000. All asking means is you're